Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game news, reviews, interviews, design talk podcast in in Oregon slash Western New York. I am Shawn Merwin here with the air guitarist of the week, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Thank you. I used to irritate the electric guitar player in my band by pretending I could do the things he could do, but I could mimic him at times, and that would annoy him even more. That like I could at all pretend to be good, and sometimes I'd do it with a guitar unplugged, and people would think I knew what I was doing, and that would really get to him. So yeah, that's why I'm a drummer.
That's why you're a drummer.
Hmm.
Excellent. Well, we will check out your drumming skills next time because we have a show to do. And I was wondering, are we back to normal now? I mean, the holidays are always like up and down and
Yeah.
and in and out and I don't know
Holiday
what day
wise,
it is.
you say, not like
Yeah.
politically or okay, holiday. Yes,
Well, no, just in terms of scheduling.
yeah,
Have we
yeah. I think
okay.
I slight disruption. My wife has flown to Paraguay, so my life is very busy with booking all those pizzas that need to be sent to the house to keep me alive. No, I'm kidding.
That
I
is
cook, but
that you cook pizzas in the oven after they're delivered.
I made bangers and mash yesterday, baby. It was delicious.
I will take your word for that. And I take the word of our listeners when they write in, and we get questions and comments, and the ones that ask to be read on the air, we do so. And we have three this week, I believe, starting with JP Roy via YouTube, who says, "What's your desert island TTRPG? Bonus points for the game you'd take with you if no D&D or derivative were available." Uh, so my first response is the joy of being a game designer is that you don't need to take one; you can just make your own. Likely involving coconuts or palm tree fronds as a randomizer. Uh, but I want you to answer this first, Teos.
It's tough. I mean, the reality is, I probably would choose D&D because it would be like the easiest to, like as you're saying, work off of. Right? It's such a nice, stable base in so many ways that working off of D&D. I mean, we can see why so many creators are creating variants and things like that, and always have across the years. Right? It's a real stable base to work off of. So I probably would. Whereas if I chose some other game that I like, and there are lots of role playing games that I like, they would be in like an angle, right? And it would be
Mhm.
harder to get out of that wedge and work on other things from that game. Some that would work are things like Gumshoe, right? If I
Mhm.
chose one of my Gumshoe games, I could then create off of that, or a Freely game, right? They're all similar enough that you could work off of that and cover a lot of those kinds of bases. So,
Right.
so something along those lines could work well too. But honestly, I had trouble thinking of one that I would take with me that wouldn't be D&D. That would, like I'm not a GURPS guy, right? Or
Right.
I'm not a super. I like ciphers, system games as one shots, but I wouldn't like forever do my campaigns in them. So nothing really worked for me. What about you?
Well, I questions like this are awesome, but I hate them because of how my brain works. Because I can never take the question as what it's meant to be, which is, what game would you want to play for the rest of your life? Uh, because I start thinking like, which has the most books that would keep me entertained for the longest, right?
Sure.
I'm going to take GURPS because I could take 50 years of all of these things to
Right.
read. Or like, which one could I build a raft out of? Right? Would I take 73 copies of Dread so I can have 73 Jenga towers that I could
Ooh.
sew into a raft? Right? My brain, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's where my brain goes.
Hmm.
Like you, I would probably take a D&D game if I could. Probably 4E actually, because it has the slowest combat.
Mm.
And so if you're trying to while away those hours waiting to be rescued, you could
Oh.
do like one high level encounter could take like 4 hours.
Oh wow, I love that. And which
So,
which
so
version of D&D best simulates escaping an island?
right. Yeah. Yeah. Probably basic. Uh, if I couldn't take a D&D clone right now, I would probably take Star Trek,
Ooh.
a D20, or 2D20 game because I think there are different modes of play, right? You could get into the drama of it. You could do ship combat. You could play it like a regular role-playing game. You could sort of get off and into the weeds of drama and start doing these like really dramatic scenes like you might get from Star Trek. Plus, there's lots of lore in the books. So I would be like, oh, what's in the alpha quadrant? What's in the beta quadrant? And then, oh,
Sure.
here's my Romulan Empire book that I could read.
Yeah.
So it would have that sort of entertainment value as well. So that's where my brain went with
Okay.
that question.
Along those lines, I could get on board with 13th Age, which in many ways would work like a D&D, but it has other rich areas that you could explore. The combats can go long if you want them to. There are things like the escalation die that make it go faster, but you can have a lot of richness to it. There's a lot of tactics, but also a lot of storytelling. That's one that could, I think, really last a long time. And from it, you could build D&D any edition pretty much. Or other types of games. So you could really expand upon it pretty easily, and the math is fairly stable behind what that runs the engine and so on. So that would work well too.
There you go. The next question comes from Chris G8989 via YouTube. I have another question pertaining to the 2024 DMG and the 2025 Monster Manual. Do either of you think that PC deaths will become more common with the 2024 5e core rulebooks? When comparing the DMG from 2014 and 2024, the calculation for encounter building has increased quite a bit. Also, all of the monster stat blocks I have seen indicate harder hitting and more challenging monsters when compared to their 2014 counterparts. I know PC power has increased overall, but hit dice haven't changed in any significant way as far as I can tell. I predict 2024 5e D&D will be a lot more deadly game when compared to 2014. But I would love to hear your opinions on this topic. I have not played enough 2024 at different levels yet, and I have not seen enough play to make any predictions. I did have one person who I trust who has written a lot of adventures already for 2024 say that their play tests have shown that it hits harder, at least at lower levels. Now, I trust this person, but I also trust my eyes more than anything else. So while I hope it's the case, I won't truly believe it until I see it with my own eyes. Extensive play testing and actual play is needed to separate speculation from the truth there.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, right? So the DMG essentially takes the old column that was the deadly and moves it over one and makes that what you would. It doesn't really have a medium, so this becomes like the hard. And what's interesting though is when I used to talk to when I talked to folks about 2014, a common thing they would say is, "Well, I just always run deadly," right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Mike Shea would say things like, "I only care whether it's going to kill the PCs or not," right? So if you're in that kind of category, I don't know how much it matters that the tables have changed. You will find your new sweet spot and move to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for so many DMs, you aren't actually running the full math. Now, if you're like me, either for publication or for home, you like running the actual math of it and playing off of that math, and then you do your own things as needed, right? Your Forge of Foes adjustments, whatever, then that is a really interesting change because it reroutes what I should be running, what I should be writing or creating. And so that is a big sizable change. Things just we just added more monsters to the encounter, right?
Mm.
And then if the monsters hit harder, well, what's that like? And it's hard to say. And I know in a future show, we're going to look at some real design comparisons, but just a quick look at like the gargoyle that they released. It has its 2 attacks and they do 14 damage now if they both hit, right? And in the past, same to hit bonus, and it would do a total of 10 damage. So we've got 4 higher. So that sounds harder, but we also got rid of the resistances to non-magical weapon attacks. So it is easier to harm now than it was before. And it's got a flyby attack that doesn't provoke opportunities. So how do you compare that? And like you said, you have to kind of really play through it to really say. And the answer is it depends on the type of encounter you're crafting. So the only way we're going to know is the aggregate of all these monsters, right? And of all the play experiences, where we can really say, yeah, across the board, you add up all these little differences, there's more damage, there's more whatevers, then that might hit harder. So then we can start to decide whether that measures up to everything being knocked prone or whatever it is that we're choosing to do, and the weapon, switching and whatever that some players may or may not be doing, the stronger subclasses, all that.
Yeah. I've only so far designed adventures for one shots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that they're not going to get a rest, and I know that we're going to have 3 encounters over the course of this 3-hour adventure, and we'll see what happens. Where the rubber meets the road is where you sit down and say, okay, I'm writing this adventure that's actually going to last over 12 encounters where they only get short rests. Where does it stand if I do one medium combat after another? And then at what level? Right. 12 encounters without a long rest at second level is different than 12 encounters without a long rest at 18th level. So
absolutely.
We have a long way to go, and we haven't even seen the full monster manual.
Right.
Yet.
Right.
So that will also play into a lot of this. So
yeah, I think
question, Chris.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I care about greatly. I really want to see how this has changed. And one thing that I can't talk about yet is what the full monster manual looks like. But I am, in fact, running those numbers, gathering all those numbers, and trying to process them so that when I do get a chance to talk to people in, I don't know, 15 days or whenever it is, then I want to compare that and say, how do those two tables look like, 2014 versus 2024? What is the average damage increase for a CRX? And that may turn out to be pretty sizable, right? So.
Yeah. One thing that I don't know if it's changed or not is there was a formula that Wizards used for creating monsters where if the monster could impose a condition, it can stun you, then it would have to be offset by less damage or offset by something else. And what I found based on that formula was they were overemphasizing that. They were overemphasizing these conditions because characters were making saves all the time, or it wasn't mattering as much as the formula said.
Right.
And so if they change that, for me, that's going to be more important than other things. Right? If they say stunning is a thing, but it doesn't have to cut the monster's hit points in half or cut their damage in half, then that will be very telling.
Yeah, the Cyclops had a bit of that in it, in that it has 2 attacks. I think it no longer it sort of seems to assume it magically always has rocks, and I think it knocks prone and it does less damage. And so it's there are times when you must use a ranged attack, sure, but in general, it seems like you're paying a damage tax to knock prone. Is that worth it? Wizards has come up with some number probably. Right. And so if we see enough monsters there, it would be interesting to see, at CRX, prone costs blah damage, right? And stun costs blah. And we saw a monster where you can choose to not be stunned in 2024 from this particular monster to take more damage, right? So that's literally a damage tax. And so if that math holds enough, then we could say, well, this is the point value that, Wizards is assigning, and that would be interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. And the another issue with assigning that is if you're fighting this creature that knocks you prone and it does less damage, that's great if you are attacking it and it always has 6 or 8 allies with it, because then they're all getting advantage on their attacks before you can act. And that is an increase in damage that's actually calculable.
Right.
Whereas if you're always fighting one Etten or one creature that knocks you prone by itself, okay, get to attacks. It knocks you prone the first time, the second time it has advantage, and then it's done. That's a tiny increase in damage. That's not. So even if you try to mathematically use it, there are all these other factors that are equally or even more important than just that particular thing.
Well, yeah, we're going to have to talk about this more in a upcoming show, because this is a super awesome.
Will. Yep. And our final question comes from Dave C via YouTube. Giving things to players that they didn't necessarily expect feels great for everyone, not just at Christmas. When players find a magic item through actually playing the game, it feels great for them. When the DM rewards them with an unexpected bonus or unexpected feat, an unexpected bonus feat or boon, even if it's something not very powerful, that's a fun experience. When they get a home base or some other sort of narrative that emerges from playing, that's something they really remember. However, when all of these things and the power they bring are hard coded into the game in a neat progression table players can look up, they become the baseline expectation and they leave very little room for DMs to give something extra without straining the already creaking balance of the game even further and make their DM prepping life even harder. When you get a power spell or item the book already said you were entitled to at level X, I think that's still nice as a player, but it's just something you were grinding toward. I can't help but feel this edition of D&D is so incredibly distrustful of DMs. It's terrified of bad DMs and has chosen to bake so many elements of what could be interactive joy into a mobile game reward schedule that it leaves decent DMs with a lot less work to do than even 5e 2014. Personally, as with other parts of the game that have been changed, I think the better choice would have been to provide guidance, teach players and DMs about good practices, and inspire rather than engaging in a futile attempt to fix potential issues with hard rules that tie DMs' hands. I don't know, does this make sense to you? I would love to hear your thoughts on the topic of designing games that leave room for people to play rather than go through the prescripted motions. And this is an absolutely amazing question because this is something that if you design a TTRPG system, you have to think about this and you have to deal with this as you design the system. Do you want me to go on, Teos, or do you want to start?
It's up to you. So I have a number of points. I'll take it for a bit.
Go ahead.
I have a number of points where I hear what's being said, and I don't think. Well, certainly the folks at sitting in Wizards aren't going like, "Hey, how can we take away from what the DM does creatively, reward wise, so on?" Like that's definitely not right. What they're seeing is the game having these areas that are, you might say, ill-defined, and that this often leads to bad play, right? So if you go onto Reddit forums and you look at what people are saying, and you might say, "Oh, okay, people are complaining about these things." And you might say, well, actually, the rules kind of cover this, but you didn't quite grasp that, or you don't know how to use that. Well, what if we told you, right? What if we helped you? What if we take out all this, grayness around how to interact with creatures and we make it an action? And if we streamline things around the utilize action and we have epic boons, so you know exactly how to, reward your players or whatever. So, those, I think they are genuinely positive attempts by the designers who all the ones we meet are good people who are trying to make the best D&D that their friends and the larger public will enjoy. That's what they're behind, right? What they're trying to do. Now, all good designers will eventually look back on their work and admit, yeah, we shouldn't have done that way. And if you listen to people talk about third edition, fourth, second, first, you'll hear lots of those regrets, right? When you look back, you might realize actually what we did was shackle the DM or create emptiness that they couldn't fill, all that. So I think that's my first reaction is this is not out of some attempt to destroy the game. It's the opposite. But sometimes you may, as a DM, an individual DM may really bounce off of that approach and what's going on. The second thought I thought, and then I'll shut up, is that the DM, when I look at the things that were described in this question, that's not the kind of stuff that I super get excited about as a DM in terms of adding rewards and life to the world. To me, it's things like, if you told me your backstory, like we were just playing Deadlands the other day, and one of our players, they're playing, Billy, the kid, who's very young, and they said, what if I come from this town that we start in scene 1, and I'm kind of leaving my home, right? So then that became a focus of part of what happened in the story was actually the parents saying to the latecomers, hey, could you go look and see what my kid's up to, right? And this interaction with your kids that starts to cement the parent character relationship, what that means, who they are, links to the other characters, right? And that starts creating the tissue of the world. And that is rewarding. And to me, is more rewarding than a +1 blah, right? +1 blahs are cool too. But truth is, I don't actually care about the +1 as much, personally, the +1s as much, or the 9th level feature or the capstone feature, as much as I do that you as a player may say to me, I really want the ability to fly or transform into another shape or to speak with nature in some way. And then I can create that in some creative way, right? Like think through what would be neat in the world and for you and design that. And that's always true no matter what the background system is doing. Oh, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm changing my answer as I go, but based on what Teos said, here's how I like to look at it. When you're creating a game, you're creating a system, you're creating a machine, and you want, as the creator of that machine, to understand what the machine does, how it's meant to be used, how the user is going to use it, what the inputs will be, and what the outcomes are, as well as you can imagine. And the more clean you can make that machine, the more understanding you have of how it is going to be used, you can create the experience that you as the designer are imagining. When you don't create the machine to its full capability to understand exactly how it's supposed to be used, the machine will break down. If you not, I don't want to use the word trust. If you expect the person who is presenting this machine to the audience to put their own gears in, they're going to put the wrong size gears in. They're going to put gears in that rust very easily due to prolonged exposure, right? They are going to use that machine incorrectly. So you need to be aware of that when you think about people designing a game. There is power in creating a system that can play itself. So as Teos says, it's not a matter of being terrified about bad DMs, although that is something you need to keep in mind. It's a matter of creating a game that flows smoothly without the need for an unknown quantity like a game master to make the system work to its best potential.
Or even a decent potential.
Exactly. That's why 4E, I thought, was an incredibly well-created game, because for combat, it in a lot of ways played itself. You could remove the game master from certain elements of the mechanics of the game, and the players could play it.
Yeah.
And so while that doesn't please everyone, as a system, as a game, that's strong. I want to look at a different game completely. There is a system called Apocalypse World, and people use the base of that game to make Powered by the Apocalypse games. One of those games is Dungeon. In that game, and in Powered by Apocalypse games, the player characters have moves. And when they roll dice, they could generally get 3 outcomes. If they roll a 10 plus on 2 dice plus their modifier, there's a success. So that you succeed. You did what you wanted to. If you roll a 6 minus, you fail, and you just fail. And then there's this gray area in between. And so that is a game where it sort of plays itself, right? If you roll and you get this happens, period. If you roll too low, this happens, period. It's that in-between stuff where there's that gray area where the game master can step in. Now, these powers have different ways that they deal with that mixed result. One of the moves is called volley. It's when you fire a missile weapon into melee. If you succeed, you hit. You do damage. If you fail, you miss. You do nothing. If you get the 7 to 9 in the middle, what does the game do? It gives you 3 choices. It says you have to move to get the shot that you need, placing you in danger as described by the DM. So that's one choice. You have to take what you can get. You do a minus d6 to the damage you would have done. Or you have to take several shots so you reduce your ammo by 1. So there, the game sort of gives you a middle ground of you make a choice of these 3. A different move is called hack and slash, and it's when you go in and you fight hand to hand. And the middle ground there is you deal damage to your enemy, but the enemy gets to make an attack against you. So that's a proscribed, no choice, no DM involvement needed, GM involvement needed. This just happens. Then there's a move called Defy Danger. So when you do something that puts you in danger, you roll. If you succeed, you succeed. If you fail, you fail. If you get the middle ground, you stumble, hesitate, or flinch. The game master will offer you a worse outcome, a hard bargain, or an ugly choice. So now this game is putting it all on the game master and the game master's conversation with the player to make this mixed result something interesting, something evocative, something fun, something that moves the game.
Mm-hmm.
You can see right here where if you have a great game master for a Dungeon World game, it can be one of the best role-playing game experiences you can have.
Right.
If you have a bad game master, if you have a game master who just can't work quickly with the flow of this game, it is a horrible experience. And that's what you risk when you remove these proscribed things from a game. And it may not seem like what I said here matches with the question about rewards, but those rewards that you're talking about are power. They're cogs in this machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so games flow smoother and are more easy to predict power-wise and control for the game master-wise when everything is prescribed. When everything is, you get this here, you get this here, you get this here, and we know it. Don't take this as me saying that we shouldn't train game masters to be able to do that. We should, because there is still room in the game to do that, no matter how prescribed the rules are. But it's just easier to run and it makes more sense and there's more control when you have those proscribed outcomes and those proscribed blocks of gears that you're putting onto the machine.
Yeah, and thinking back to like sort of that when you brought up fourth edition in many ways came up because previous editions had these undefined things, and that was part of the beauty of the game, right? You know, like, well, I'm a rogue, my sneak attack only works every now and then, so I want to go and try to put myself in a situation for this. I'm spending all round doing this. Here's what I'm doing. And the DM would adjudicate and go, no, doesn't work. You're like, okay, I wasted my round. Now this next round, I will try to set myself up for a sneak attack. No, doesn't work. Are you kidding me? You know? And so that, and if you played back then, you had this experience as I did and everybody did. And there were truly bad game masters or let's take away bad and say game masters who failed to see that the fun required some ratio of succeeding and of working with the players rather than against them. So rules began to try to do that more, right? And even what Apocalypse World is doing is saying, look, the dice are deciding whether you're a mean DM or good DM. Mm-hmm. And in this little area, we're giving you a little wiggle room. And so it is prescribing in a way, right? And saying in this band of results, here you will need to make this type of a decision, right? Or the Star Wars game with the Genesis system, right? Where, you know, you succeed, but complication, fail with this. And some DMs, and it's not that they just can be bad or good DMs, but some DMs are very quick to improvise and welcome the concept of saying like, well, as you fire blaster, this thing happened, right? Others will just, after the third time, you see their brain shut down and they go like, and something else happens. Gosh, I don't know what. And then you can go to the table and say, oh, it's minus blah. You know, there's a mechanical thing you can just go to as your default. Cypher system has something like that too. And that's fine. But the game starts to lose that promise because it's happening so often, right? So all the games are trying to deal with this, and D&D is trying to deal with this, right? And in the end, it's each edition is trying to strike that balance between how do I create great open play, but remove this sort of uncertainty? And as you said, putting it on the shoulders of the DM. How do I make that easier? How do I lighten the load while keeping the fun high? Different design groups are going to think differently. One of the things that 5th edition did was play through all the editions, and they came to believe, and Rodney Thompson said way better than I can remember or say it myself, but they essentially found that the best gameplay came when the rules could get in and get out, and both player and DM would improvise upon that. And it can be argued that we've gone further in the direction of imposing rather than freedom beyond what at least that team found was good, which we know 2014 is very successful. But we have yet to see enough 2024 to know, is this new mix actually great for today's players? I don't know. Time will tell. We can see how you're bouncing off of it, dear question asker. But
Right.
and sometimes we do too. But we have to see more play to kind of see how that goes. And some of it also is where you are in your transition of games. If you're in that point where you feel like, as a DM can really improvise, and I love players who are just improvising, well, this will get in your way. But if you're a newer player, maybe this is welcome, right? It might be different.
Yep. So 3 great questions again this week. Thank you so much for listening. We'll tell you at the end of the show how you can talk to us. But now let's get into our news and commentary section, starting with Chaosium's 50th anniversary and what they are doing. Are you running a convention, Teos?
No.
But you should.
I should, because what? I get what?
Why? You can get from Chaosium, makers of Call of Cthulhu and other games, a convention pack with $500 worth of free printed RPG material. In addition, digital convention demos will also be provided. Shipping is free to the US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union. How do you do this? Well, if you're a convention, you apply for the pack. You can then get this pack of printed RPG and digital material worth up to $500 as a reward for game masters, as a prize for players, as part of your convention library, or however you want to use it. You must apply at least 30 days before your convention in order to receive it. And again, Chaosium is offering this as part of their 50th anniversary celebration taking place this year in 2025.
That's super cool. I love that they kind of acknowledge, we don't know exactly how you'll use this. Maybe you'll give it to the GMs. Maybe you'll use it as your ongoing library of stuff. Maybe you'll give it out as rewards. Do what you will. And you'll get all these digital things you can use to run demos and things like that too. So that's cool.
It is. Smart. And someone who I believe now works for Chaosium is Mike Mearls. And Mike has a Patreon where he talks about design things. And this week he talked about morale. Teos, I want you to start off this discussion if you would.
Yeah, so, morale systems are super interesting. It's that idea that was baked into older editions that at any given time, one of the sides that aren't the characters could decide to break away and give up or run or something like that. And depending on your kind of leaning during those older edition games, you loved this or skipped it entirely. I think our groups completely skipped it. But at times it's something I incorporate into my play, just not with a formal system. But as people have looked at older systems and kind of how to draw from them, morale has been something that's come up often. It's in the 2014 DMG, it's in the 2024 DMG, though often in ways that people don't super use or like. I would say those who are looking for such systems tend to say, well, instead I use this other version. So here is Mike taking a look at it. And he begins by saying, here are my goals for the design. So I want to do strength in numbers. I want the rules to make it easier to run fights against large numbers of opponents in 5e. Using morale will make sense with large groups more than with single monsters, right? Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. 5th edition fights can become slogs if there are too many creatures involved. So the morale system can allow you to throw a bunch of them, knowing that the morale rules will end some of those fights before you have to actually defeat every single one, which is an interesting premise. That is totally not how I design fights, but that's neat, and I could get behind that for some fights. Flexibility. I made morale a rating that you can assign to any monster, giving you the chance to reflect a creature's motivations, stake in the battle, and so on. So there is no canonical morale for all creatures. Rather, you can assign this to creatures. I also want a system where the same monsters might have a different morale rating depending on the situation, which is interesting. Last is tactical variation. Killing the other side as quickly as possible is the obvious default strategy in D&D. I wanted a system that would encourage different approaches, whether neutralizing opponents rather than killing them, or spreading out damage to injure a bunch of foes and encourage them to run.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I want to ask you first, though. What do you think about this?
Of the system or morale in general, or what are you thinking?
Yes, any or all of the above.
So to me, my challenge, and if someone said to me, Teos, design a morale system, I would say, okay. At a basic level, it's kind of easy of saying like, hey, some criteria have kicked in a fight. Now check and see whether that makes you run away. And the problem my brain struggles with is I always think to myself, but don't I already as DM have an answer of what I want, what I say is the best, the most fun, right? It's round 3. Let's say it's round 1. I don't want the fight to end in round 1 unless there is a cooler concept going on, right? These goblins actually have really neat information, and you actually probably shouldn't have attacked them. And so you finding out that you shouldn't could actually lead us back to the most fun we can have with this scene, which is not clobbering goblins. But I know that, so I can do that. I can have the goblin, fall to the side, and you see that they're wearing a weird badge, right? Mm-hmm. Or they say a thing that sounds like some kind of code word that maybe sounds interesting to you. So I'll just do that, right? And now it's round 4, and the question is, and I feel like this combat would be better if it ended. Can't I just have them surrender? Like, why am I rolling? So that's that's where I start.
Yeah. It's I saw this topic and I went, oh no. I understand that we game designers have a desire to create systems. That's what we do, right? The wisdom then comes down to figuring out whether or not the system makes the game better. Regardless of how elegant the system is, you can build the perfect system, but if the system doesn't serve the needs of the game, then it just doesn't need to be in the game.
Yeah.
And when I read his first goal, I went, okay, D&D has tried and tried and tried to integrate a mass combat system into the rules. It started as a mass combat system, for God's sake, right? With chainmail.
Yeah.
So I understand that. And I thought, okay, maybe this, I get that. Morale as a way to run larger combats that can be affected by more than just the individual characters doing individual things. I can get behind this.
Yeah.
But then as it went through the iteration of the system, I was just like, no, it just comes down back to what you say.
So in defense of this, right, and Mike's fun because he has, if you followed his blogging when he was, at D&D, he has written many times about mass combat and these kinds of things.
Exactly.
This is the kind of thing that's going around in his brain all the time because he loves that sort of old school play and so on, as many do.
Yeah.
And what I can hear a lot of my good friends saying, and folks on our Discord as well, is that a lot of what these types of systems are trying to do is create emergent play. And they're not hung up on the idea of a given encounter sort of being critical, right? So that the story is what the story is. And I look forward to hearing what they'll say about what I'm saying about what they think. But that idea that like, if we go into this room with these orcs and the orcs split right off the bat, that's its own fun story and that's fine. And the play emerges from what happened there. It's not a critical battle, which is totally cool, except usually I spend hours designing that orc battle because the fun to me is not just in fighting orcs, it's in all of whatever is going on in this scene.
Mhm.
And if they just run off, I have actually removed the fun, because my design is very it is emergent. It's not that it doesn't emerge, but it's based on the ingredients that are in this scene.
Yep.
So if they just flee, no ingredients are used. It's the equivalent of, you prepare to make a meal and then you just eat the parsley and chuck the rest out, right? Like, well,
Yep.
yes, now we can eat something else. But
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a few basic truths of D&D or role-playing games. Teos, if you give a monster or you give a creature a stat block, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it can be killed.
Okay, so there you go. If you create a system,
Mm-hmm.
people are going to try to game the system.
True.
And so you're creating a system by which you are able to win a combat. People are going to find ways to game that. And then they will be upset when in the first round of the boss battle, they do the thing that would say, oh, technically, according to these rules, all of the minions of this dragon are actually should be fleeing right now, as should the dragon, right? Because the rules say, if I do this and you roll this, that's what happens.
Right.
And so that takes away the agency of the DM, as Teos has been saying, to tell a story. And in my experience, morale and surrendering and those sorts of things have always had more of a storytelling element than a game element. I, as the game master, have a feel for when it makes sense for the monsters to surrender, either in terms of the story or in terms of the pacing of the game. So I don't need the system to be telling me that.
Yeah.
And as game designers, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
As game designers, what happens then when I'm trying to create a new feat or a new subclass? Oh, I'm creating a new fighter subclass. I can't give temporary hit points because this subclass does that. I can't mess around with spell slots because this subclass does that. Oh, I know. There's the new morale system. So I will make a subclass that gets a bonus to morale system. And when I make a feat, I'll make this feat that gives characters bonuses to their morale checks or whatever. So then you get people who need to design for it and then also will take advantage of that design to even break the system further.
Yeah. So do you want me to quickly kind of look at this specific system?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So Mike's system assigns a rating from 1 to 3 to each monster, to each kind of group of monsters. So 1, 2, or 3: unsteady, determined, fanatical. And you can, however, choose to ignore morale and simply decide, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about. So you could say, well, in this dragon fight, sorry, we're not using these rules. And as you said, then if anything's built off of it, now everybody's going to complain. So then what happens is a side's total morale changes during an encounter. When a creature is reduced to half or less of its maximum hit points, subtract 1 from its side's total morale. When a creature is slain, defeated, or otherwise left unable to defeat, subtract 2 from its side's total morale. Both these penalties apply only once per creature. But of course, you could have multiple creatures on a side. The DM can opt to reverse a morale loss if some effect restores a defeated creature to action, but it's very creature-based. So why does that matter? Because the first time a side's morale is at or less of its start value at the beginning of a round, which is a little weird because that means always, make a morale check.
I think it means half. First time a side's morale is at half or less its starting value. I think that's what he means there.
All right. So now we make a d20 roll, and a 15 or higher, the side is broken. Otherwise, it continues to fight. So if you have morale 1, let's say morale 2, and one of the creatures reduced to half or less of its maximum hit points, then at the start of the next round, we would roll to see, and if you rolled a 15 or higher, they would run. But it also says if a side's total morale is 0 or less at the start of a round, it is automatically broken. So it says to me if we have a fight, 2 monsters are taken to half of their hit points or lower, they would all just break. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Charisma and morale can charisma checks can bolster or break a side's morale, and each side can benefit or suffer the effects of these once per encounter. So someone can attempt a charisma check to break an opposing side, and you lose morale based on your check. You can inspire to try to bolster the side's morale, and so you roll, and you get actually a die to roll from D4 to 68, depending on the check, and that becomes like a change in morale, which is interesting because your morale is only 1 to 3, but you could get 68 morale change.
It's 1 to 3 per creature in the battle.
I thought it was each
So
side.
if you have
that makes a lot more sense.
If you have 50 goblins who are all fanatical, that would be 150 morale.
Okay, this makes a lot more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But it still is the 15 or higher. So getting to 0 will be hard, but the 15 or higher is still, each round that can happen, and that's the happen sense of the running. Okay.
Yeah. So if a creature is fanatical, its morale starts at 3. Gotcha. If it's reduced to half, that would subtract 1 from the entire total.
Yep.
And if it's slain, it would subtract 2. So basically, if you're at a 3 morale for a creature,
okay,
you would need to take it all the way down to out in order to remove that creature's morale addition to the total.
To the pool.
If it starts at 1, when you reduce it to half, you've already eliminated its addition to the total morale. And then if you defeat it, it's actually 2 less than it had added before.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so what this is saying is there is a 75% chance, roughly, that once a group is reduced to half its morale, it has a chance to have to surrender.
And now it gives you something that you're tracking all the time because the pool's that large. You really need to track carefully every time you hit the bloodied level. Every time you drop somebody, you must do this so that you can check to see whether you reach that half point. And then at some point, you may have a side that wants to do this morale change to further try to whittle it down. That's interesting. And the morale change is interesting because in theory, that would be a big role-playing moment because you only get to do it once, but you say, okay, now I'm going to try to really bring these guys into surrendering, which is indicative of your desire, right? I want them to flee or fold or listen to me. So I'm making this impassioned plea that they're going to be defeated, which is an interesting thing to do. Some groups might say, well, I just want to kill them. And that's that choice, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's part of the system that there are lots of parts of this where if this is a system in place, the what ifs become so big that you need to start adding rules on. What if it's an ancient red dragon and 700 kobolds who are unsteady? Technically, the dragon only adds 3 to the whole morale pool. So you could defeat the dragon, and that would only remove 3 points from the total morale. So these unsteady goblins, kobolds, whatever, would continue to fight even though the ancient red dragon's dead.
They're just so angry.
Right. And so there's I get the intent, and I actually like the intent, like I said. Something that would make a big mass combat easier to manage. If we could do that, that would be great. But it ends up being this thing where, okay, we create the core, but we need to add this. Oh, we need to add this. And it just gets to the point where it becomes its own book.
Yeah.
And we know what happens when we try to make a mass combat rule book. Nobody buys it.
I have a couple on my shelf. So I'm the person who buys and
Teos bought.
I buy it as a historical interest point. Now you've helped me understand these rules. Thank you. I do like them for particular encounters. I think that could be really fun, as you're saying, right? Like that idea of, hey, mass combat type thing. How do you defeat these different forces that are here allied protecting the dragon could be cool. But it wouldn't. I wouldn't want it just applied to the dragon. It's not about the dragon. It's about the fact the dragon's surrounded by all these other forces. You got to get rid of them so you can focus on the dragon. That could be cool.
Yeah. One thing I would add just right off the bat is unless the opponent's morale is less than yours, they will not flee. Because as written, your side could be at morale. You could have one. You could have one adventurer left with one hit point. Restrained and not unconscious, restrained and bleeding and whatever. And as soon as I do that one, I killed that one goblin over there. Now its morale is low, so now I make the check. And those are these edge cases where the rules might say use your best judgment, but you could always just use your best judgment anyway. So why are we using the system, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, and in this system, as I understand it, the PCs don't have a rating, so yeah, they could be on the ropes, but you could fail, and yeah, so you'd have to somehow account for that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good thought exercise
yeah,
and a good start for a system, but it's that question of do we need it? Is the game going to be better off for it? And
yeah.
I don't know yet.
And a little extra bit just to go with this, because we're talking about something that Mike put on his Patreon, which is very thought provoking. We enjoy the thought provoking nature of what he writes on Patreon. So he also wrote that the system he's been working on will be called Odyssey, and so he's now starting to use that name in the various posts, and is excited about this is all going together towards what he will eventually package as a project that he kickstarts called Odyssey.
There you go. We now know who will be publishing the Darrington Press books. That will be McMillan Publishers. In a press release, we learned that McMillan has entered a deal with Darrington Press, providing sales and distribution for the Daggerheart RPG, releasing in the spring of 2025. In addition to the Daggerheart core set, McMillan will also handle U.S. and international sales for other Darrington Press titles like the Tal'Darai campaign setting Reborn, the Candela Obscura rulebook, and new titles going into 2026 and 2027. What does this deal allow? It allows products to reach book channels in addition to the existing hobby book channel, and U.S. and international distribution is included in this deal.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. It'll be interesting to see whether you can see a tangible difference, right? Do you go to your local store, whatever it may be, some larger branch, and see these more than you see them now? Because you do see them sometimes, and they've had a lot of luck with their book side of things that have book deals, but you don't see the RPG stuff over there. And so maybe more of their games, their board games, even their role-playing games, will see it into wider locations, which, given the Amazon deal, I just finished watching it, the Critical Role Vox Machina series, and that's obviously doing well on Amazon, so it's a good move.
Indeed. We have an article from Goblin's Henchman on monster wordplay. So what this blog says is change a monster's name and get a new idea for something about that monster. So switch a few letters, change a letter here or there, and see what happens. The blog uses an example of goblin and dragon. So one of the examples is, instead of a goblin, it's a goblong, which is a giant mud skipper the size of a dog that spews forth bile at would-be intruders. How about the crocblin instead of the goblin? What do you think
Yeah, I
about
like
that,
that.
Teos?
Yeah, the heavily armored reptilian creature with a mace-like tail. I liked the grablin, which is a carnivorous vine that grabs and chokes a victim. And I even thought about this as just more goblin variants, right? So it's a goblin that has long hands and chokes away your victim. It's pretty fun.
Instead of a dragon, you have a drink gun, a loaf-sized translucent nuisance invertebrate with a long prehensile siphon-like proboscis that goes into camps and drinks any fluid available. including water, wine, or beer. There's nothing like taking a party's beer.
Don't touch my ale.
It's funny that we for Surviving Strange Hollow, Emily Hare, the artist whose work inspired our
Mm-hmm.
book, her creatures sometimes used strange, funny names or spoonerisms, like where you switch the first
Mm-hmm.
letters or letters within words. So we had to come up with what a O's niche does instead of a nose itch.
Nose edge. I like that.
O's niche, yeah. So
Yeah,
there were a few things like that that we got to play with.
that's great stuff. I love it.
Yep. And for our creator corner, we are looking first at the pdimagearchive.org. What is this, Teos?
It's a curated collection of more than 10,000 out of copyright historical images, all free to explore and reuse. Our aim, quote, is to offer a platform that will serve both as a practical resource and a place to simply wander, an ever growing portal to discover more than 2,000 years of visual culture. So it's neat. It's another of these places you can go to and just search for art, and it's not copyrighted, so you can use it in your projects. I did run some like typical fantasy searches, and I had more luck when I looked by themes in terms of architecture and things like that. There were some fun ideas. But it wasn't as good as some of the other sites that I've seen at sort of providing. Like if I looked for dragon, I didn't get any hits, right? So it varies, but it's a place you can look to for a project where you're looking to, penny pinch a bit and keep costs low. Then this is another good resource for that.
There you go. Again, that is pdimagearchive.org. And Teos, tell me about Cairn 2E and what it has been translated into.
Yeah, the Cairn and Cairn 2E RPGs by Yokai Guy are popular for the OSR type game, and you can get them in Spanish. There has been a translation made by Mario of la Esquina del Rol with corrections by Roque Romero. You can get it on itch.io, link in our show notes, or search for it on itch. And there's also a print version you can get through Lulu. There is also a Cairn 1E translation in Spanish, so both are free, and you can just go there and download it. If you like playing RPGs in Spanish, this is a fun option. Or if you just want to look at the design of it in Spanish, this is a great way to do that.
There you go. Quite a strong opening here on Mastering Dungeons. And as Teos is showing us, we need to send a thanks and a shout out to one of our listeners.
Yeah.
Teos, you want to tell
So
us there?
Luz Tak from Uruguay sent us this Thumber Chod popcorn bucket that some countries, especially in Latin America, got as part of the deal for the Honor Among Thieves movie. And he was kind enough to send two, one to me and one to Shawn. So I'll get Shawn's to him when I see him at Winter Fantasy. Pretty sweet. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
I know what I'm eating my next bowl of popcorn out of. Right there. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that.